What's going on, guys? It's me, Train Man, and welcome back to the Zombie Train episode 100 and... what is this? 186. That's right. We finally wrapped around 186 after jumping back in time to do 183 with that route review. Anyways, there's some groundbreaking stuff going on in this episode. We've got the narrow gauge pass, the track work, for the most part, is done, and that's really the big thing. Actually, I made a little list of notes for this, so... because this marks version 0.9.0, and once we reach beta version 1.0, it'll be another public release. So, completed track work on the narrow gauge pass. The Kerosene Valley oil well is in place, even though it's kind of out of date, so to speak. More terrain work is going to be done around the south end of the gorge, you'll see that. And we have the Tuckaduck Viaduct in place on the old main. It's a cool bridge, I wanted to use it. A couple more rivers, terrain features are marked, and where the quartz sand pit is going to be is now marked as well. And also the AI is no longer broken, but I pulled most of them out. Now, cleanup of rolling stock in preparation of Beta 1.0 has begun, and I also removed Herobrine. So, here's me marking the quartz sand pit. And now let's move on to the question this week. So, this was actually asked by a guy by the name of Brandon Reed. What has become of Pere Marquette 1225? And this was back on episode 177. So obviously it took me a little bit to get to, but hey, listen, the list of questions is long and I like it. Thank you for asking questions. So, Pere Marquette 1225 is very similar to Nickel Plate 765, and 765 was a very, very good engine when it came to working on the Zombie Train, although we gave that to the Toronto Raillands, as I've said. Now, the Toronto Raillands did a very good job with 765 and getting a lot of work done while we weren't around, especially while we were out west. However, 1225 was in no situation to be going much of anywhere in 2012. Now keep in mind, this was when it had been taken down for rebuild, and it wasn't just, a normal 15-year. It was, the firebox sheets had deteriorated. They needed replacement. So, this was, it took about 3 years to do all that work, and 2012 is right in the middle of it. So, we didn't have 1225 for the Zombie Train Incorporated. Or no, sorry. We did have 1225 for the Zombie Train Incorporated, but we did not have 1225 beforehand. Now, where does 1225 stay? I had only a small hand in getting 1225 operational because it was done before Zombie Train Inc. It was largely done by the Toronto Raillands to, to do, whatchamacallit. So, where does it stay? It stays in, where does it stay? Oh, it's at the SRI. Okay, so I thought so, but I didn't want to say it outright. So, it stays at the Steam Railroading Institute. I've talked about Michigan before, and with the SRI and stuff like that. It makes me wonder about Hank and about Carolyn and Oswald, the pair who took Hank and ran off with him. But, as I was saying, 1225 was largely worked on by members of the Toronto Raillands in order to get a second engine. And it was done with a little bit of help from us, but not too much, and in fact, largely, it was done while we were gone. By the time when we left for the West, it was not operational. When we came back, it was. And I did wonder where they got the supplies and stuff like that for the engine. I wondered where they got the steel. But as I came to understand, they largely just scrapped what they had and used whatever facilities they could get their hands on. Now, let's go over to Owosso. Personally, I don't know how capable the shops in Owosso are, but I would figure they're capable enough to get the engine back into working condition without too much, actually it doesn't look like they have much here, without too much work, but as far as I understand, it didn't leave Owosso until it was operational. So that means the Toronto Raillands on their own came in via train, probably on 765, and cleared out the town as best they could, and then sort of made it a base of operations. And we didn't really use Owosso as a base of operations that much, because, as I've said, there isn't much there. But we did go through and sort of raid the place after Zombie Train Incorporated. It would have been a good place to work off of if we needed someplace in the area. It was considered, partly because of its significance with 1225, but partly because it's not a particularly large town. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's got an airstrip, which is nice. It's got a turntable, and it's got, well, it had a roundhouse, and, putting up a structure over the tracks wouldn't be that hard. But we eventually sort of discarded that because we didn't need a huge, we didn't need a huge thing in Michigan, and we ended up sort of basing everything out of Bayous Blanc, as I explained previously. Of course, you can't get a train out to Bayous Blanc, but that was fine. Our shipping point was out of a little tiny town called Seabewenning, which just allowed us access to Lake Huron via Saginaw Bay. And we actually did some infrastructure work over there. But 1225 was generally not my responsibility. Before Zombie Train Incorporated, we were actually going to go with working primarily off of what the Toronto Raillands were doing. We had one engine, we had one train, and we sort of spent all of our time running around responding to radio messages and stuff like that, whereas they were doing a very concerted effort to rebuild, which is no surprise why they wanted that engine back in steam. And it was one of the easier ones. It wasn't necessarily one of the easier ones to do, I should say, but it was probably the most bang for their buck, and it was nearby-ish. Now, that engine then got to stretch its legs running all around the northern United States, all around New England, all around southern Canada, or southeastern, I suppose. It didn't really go west. And it, I believe, oh wait, no, it clearly wasn't, because there aren't any railroad tracks up there. Well, was it? Hold on. Oh, well, actually, you can get in via there. It or 765 was present at something that I'm going to get to, and I forget. I was apparently pronouncing something. Sault Ste. Marie. Was that how I was supposed to pronounce it? Anyways, so it was probably, actually, it's worth pointing out, 1225 was probably the first locomotive restored by somebody that wasn't us. And it was probably the first downed locomotive that was brought back into service before Zombie Train Incorporated. It was the first one. And naturally I was impressed by the resourcefulness and, everything that the Toronto Rail Lines kept putting out, and they had my praise, and then they kept going on and doing some great things. Now, 1225 eventually fell into a schedule, and like Fort Wayne was the home of 765. Fort Wayne is a little bit big to clear out, but the two Burkes, they did a lot of running into the heartland before the Zombie Turn Incorporated, because Toronto wanted to do a lot of rebuilding. So 1225 and 765, or primarily 1225, because I guess they developed a detachment. Sorry. The Toronto Rail Lines had developed an attachment to 765 and kept 765 running out of Toronto and going to places in New York and New England. And 1225 would run west out of Toronto and would run into places like Indiana and places like Illinois and Kentucky, well, western Kentucky, out to clay pits. And this was so that they could basically transport the clay back and turn it into bricks and build things. And build things primarily being walls to keep zombies out. And of course buildings to keep, shelter and whatever. And of course to work on and rebuild bridges that had become damaged. And what have you. Now, and we were sort of running around and they were doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And so 1225 became the western engine, 765 became the eastern engine, and we became, well, for a little while we were the southern engine, and then we went out west. I don't know what engine they got next, but I know it was something comparably sized. They may have sprung for another Burke, because I recall them going back to Steamtown. Or I recall them going to Steamtown. And they quite liked the Burkes. But that wasn't done. So either it was the one at the Pennsylvania Railroad Museum, which is 757, or it was the one at Steamtown, or actually no, it may have been the one at the Age of Steam Roundhouse, although 2012, I'm not sure how much of the roundhouse was built at that point. Now, but either way, they were working on their third Burke when the Zombie Train Incorporated came around. It was slow-going work, and it's not like, they had two to sort of base their figurings off of, but they didn't have quite so much to work off of. Oh, that's the wrong city. And it was really just sort of trading, okay, well, what can we do with what we have? What can we do with what we have? And right in the center of Toronto, anyways, they have the Roundhouse Park there, which is their museum. I'm not sure what they have in it, but at this point in time, it was not connected to the main line in any way, shape, or form. That got connected after Zombie Train Incorporated. As much as they wanted to do it. There wasn't the drive there. It was, okay, we can work on stuff, outside of having the roundhouse. And, naturally, they worked on 1225 at a distance. So, 1225 was done, I think, by 2014. Maybe a little bit later. They were not limited by money. That's for sure. But they were limited by the fact that they had trouble getting their hands on the proper materials and the proper tools to use those materials. But again, then they had a whole two countries to scavenge from, frankly. They didn't have that much trouble, aside from getting people off the duty of making food and onto the duty of making locomotive. I like to think that as far as checks and balances go, it paid off in the end. And when I made it back to Toronto after I made it back east, having 3254, 765, and 1225 all parked there together. That was pretty damn cool. Alright, anyways. Until next week, Train Man out.